plenty to get through. So maybe I'll just start with a good morning. I'm not going to formally introduce myself, but just to say thanks for coming along this morning to our seminar to hear more about the Irish Region's European Office, and so to talk also about the work of the Southern Regional Assembly. So I am going to firstly hand you over to David Kelly, who's going to do some introductory remarks on behalf of the Southern Regional Assembly, and then we can go through the agenda after that and the morning proceedings. Over to you, David.
Okay. Thanks, Teresa. Look, good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to our online meeting. I suppose on one level it's a pity that we're not meeting in person, but look, needs must, and I suppose we're lucky that we have platforms like this to facilitate meetings so we can continue working. I think there might be a note put up in chat just around the protocol for using the GoToMeeting, but look, I think we're all pretty much it's second nature to most of us now at this stage, so as we're all probably pretty much using it. Look, as Teresa said, my name is David Kelly. I'm the Director of the Southern Regional Assembly. It's not my intention to speak too long this morning because, as Teresa said, there are probably more interesting speakers to come after me. But look, I just want to set the context and maybe set out quickly the purpose of today's meeting. For those who may not be as familiar with the regional assemblies, maybe just to say that the overall remit of ourselves in the Southern Regional Assembly and our two sister organisations is around promoting and supporting sustainable and balanced development of our regions. And we probably have two main tools, or two main things in our armory in terms of supporting this remit. The first is around regional planning, and specifically the development and implementation of the regional spatial and economic strategy for the Southern region. So we call it the RESAS. The overall purpose of the RESAS is really to translate the I suppose the national policy, the national objectives of the national planning framework and the government's economic policies into regional level. It's a 12-year framework. It has a statutory basis, and it really sets out the framework for the development of the region over the next 12 years. The other key tool we have is around EU funding. So that is in terms of managing the EU operational programs for the region, and also in terms of sourcing and accessing EU funds from other funded programs to bring funding and projects to the region into support of that. I suppose there's a key component in terms of both of those tools, and that is really about the alignment of policy. So that's the alignment of policy from EU level right through to national, to regional, right down to the local level. And in terms of the development of the regional strategy, that was at the heart of the whole process in terms of aligning the national policy, but also in terms of the EU policy and bringing that into the remit of the regional strategy. And you'll see if you look at I suppose the high level objectives of the regional strategy, they very much align and connect very, very neatly with the high level priorities of the EU in terms of, I suppose, driving the smart agenda. So smart city, smart region lines up very well. The transition to the low carbon society, fits in with the Green Deal and I suppose policy objective 2 from Europe, the urban agenda, and so on. So look, now that the regional strategies are in place, all of the local authorities are in varying stages of renewing and updating their city and county development plans, which they're required to do to bring in line with the objectives that are set out in the regional strategy. I suppose at one level, the timing of this probably couldn't be better because we're now moving into a new phase of EU programs. So the planning is beginning for all of the next round of EU funded programs. And with that, it provides a huge opportunity to access EU funding to help deliver on some of the key objectives that will be identified in the county development plans and city development plans once they align with policy. So it's important now at this stage to really start thinking about what are the priorities that are going to emerge through the development of this county and city development plans and how they will fit with, I suppose, the EU objectives, with the national policy objectives in terms of identifying and sourcing what are the best sources of EU funding and national funding to deliver on this. I suppose from our perspective, it's important to say that the Regional Assembly is here to support you in that process through the Irish Regional Office, and Teresa will go through that in a few moments in terms of what the Regions Office can do to support you. and we'll also give you a tour of the, I suppose, the main EU funding programs that are coming down the line, but also in terms of, I suppose, our own office in Waterford through the ETC network that we have in place. And Rose and Karen will give you a quick presentation on the support that it can provide. And also in terms of the network of contact points we have for the various programs. And Breda Curran will give you, I suppose, a quick introduction in terms of the support that the contact points can offer in terms of helping you in developing and pushing forward your projects. I suppose another important point to bear in mind is that in addition to the support that the Regional Assembly can give through its various aspects in terms of our own office and the office in Brussels, it's also important that local authorities look at the capacity internally and build up the capacity internally to work on projects and to support the development and implementation of projects. And you'll hear two really good examples later on this morning as well from Ronan in Cork and Terry in Limerick in terms of what they have learned, and I suppose the advantages of having that internal capacity can give in terms of the success rates in accessing EU funding. Just another important point to note at this stage is that in the last number of weeks, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Minister Michael McGrath, has appointed the Regional Assembly's responsibility for developing and implementing the next generation or the next round of EU funding programs. And it's our ambition through those programs that we will utilize them to really target some of the high-level key objectives that are set in the regional, spatial, and economic strategies. I suppose the next extension of that is that there will be an opportunity, and it's our ambition to really try and direct an element of that funding to support the local authorities in driving and in implementing some of the key objectives. So over the next number of weeks and months, we will be in touch with you to discuss that and to identify how that can be evolved over the coming weeks and months. So look, I suppose the key point is that that I'd like to, I suppose, you to take away from today is that it's important that you bear in mind the whole idea that funding is going to follow policy, and that's a key message that's coming not only from the EU but also from government. So any investments that are going to be made have to line up with policy. So it is important to start thinking about that, to start getting, I suppose, your ideas and your projects and your priorities in place. The Regional Assembly, through our own offices and through our office in Brussels, is here to support you. And I suppose today is really just the start of that conversation, and it will evolve further over the next coming weeks and months. So look, with those few words of introduction, I'll hand over to Teresa, who will take you through the rest of the day. And I really hope that you get, that you get some really good value from today. And as I said, it is only the beginning, and we will be there to support and work with you over the coming weeks and months. So hand over to Teresa.
Thank you very much, David. And I hope you can all see the screen, can you? It's all visible for everyone?
It is, Teresa, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, David, for that introduction, and you very kindly went through the agenda, so I don't need to do that, but as you mentioned, I'll give an introduction to the Irish Regions European Office and then go through some of the funding programs before handing over to the other speakers. Just to say that I talk about in the last 2 points how to get involved and next steps. I'm actually going to cover that when I'm speaking in the presentation, and then we'll hear from the other speakers. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Irish Regions European Office, it has been in existence for some 20 years in various guises. I just joined the office last year. So I'm in post just a year last week, and my background is in EU, always in EU policy and EU funding in Northern Ireland, the border region of Ireland, previously in Brussels, and now back in Brussels again. So hopefully have a wealth of experience which I bring to this role. So when I joined last year, I looked at all of the work that is ongoing within the office, and absolutely great work was already ongoing before I joined, but I wanted to put it into a strategy and a work plan for the regional assemblies and for local authorities. So important to say that the Irish Regions European Office is a shared service of for the three regional assemblies. So you can see on the map the three regional assembly areas, and the Irish Regions European Office works on behalf of the three of those. But obviously I need to have a line manager somewhere in the country, so it's the Eastern and Midland Regional Office that actually have line management, if you like, responsibility for myself and colleagues. The strategy then that we developed was to ensure that the Irish Regions European Office delivers timely strategic advice and information on EU policy developments to the three regional assemblies and to local authorities in Ireland. So I suppose one of the things that I saw when I came to the role was the need to engage further with the local authorities, and through the three regional assemblies. That's what we're hoping to do, and these seminars are, as David said, kicks off that engagement. We're also then supporting the Irish delegation to the Committee of the Regions, and I'll say more about that in a moment. So the objectives then of the Irish Regions European Office are to provide a secretariat for the national delegation to the Committee of the Regions. And if you're not familiar with the Committee of the Regions, it's a European body set up to ensure that the voice of a local and regional government is heard in the decision making and the legislative process at EU level. So it was set up 25 years ago under the Maastricht Treaty, and is to give that effective voice to local and regional authorities. It's set up a little bit like the European Parliament, in that it has a plenary structure and a committee structure, and Ireland has 9 members on the Committee of the Regions, and you have many members from the Southern Regional Assembly area, including Councillor Michael Murphy, who leads the Irish delegation. He's from Tipperary County Council. You have Kieran McCarthy and Deirdre Ford from Cork, and I'm probably missing a few others, but of the 9 you have in the Southern Regional Assembly, quite a number. So we work with them, we provide them with briefings, we provide them with advice and guidance, and we liaise with the regional assemblies to get views to feed into the EU policy areas that our members are working on. We're also about raising awareness and communicating the opportunities for participation in EU funding programmes. So you might be thinking, well, I haven't seen so much of that directly to your local authority, but after these types of meetings, that's exactly what we want to do, is to hone in on that. Then we're seeking opportunities for influencing EU policy developments. So that is by working with our MEPs and working with the Irish permanent representation to the EU. So we're based in normal circumstances in the same office as the Irish civil servants who are here, and there's about 100 of them who are here representing Ireland and representing the government in discussions on EU policy through the Council of Ministers. So we work very closely with those colleagues. We have built good relationships with them and with the MEPs and their assistants. So they're also then about building capacity and partnerships with other regions. And you know, Brussels is a great hub for that and for meeting other regions. And in normal times, we would be out and about at events, at policy events, at networking events, and would be looking, we are attending meetings online of various different organisations and seeking to look at the commonalities and where there might be an opportunity to collaborate and participate. We're then about raising the profile and the strengths of local and regional government in Ireland to our European partners and to the European institutions. And one of the main ways we try to do this is through our website and through showcasing the work that you're doing. And we'll come back to that later, because we want to be able to ensure that you're liaising with us and telling us about the good work that you're doing. And then we act as a signpost to the European Territorial Cooperation which otherwise known as Interreg national contact points, who are based in the regional assemblies throughout Ireland. So we're about highlighting their role and what they can do in providing pre and post development support, because their support on the various programs is much more in depth than in terms of you as local authorities wishing to make an application. So that's our objectives. And just in terms then of our current activities and what we've been doing, obviously in the current climate, it's been a little bit more difficult to do some of this, and obviously ideally I'd have liked to have been there with you all today, but circumstances don't allow for that. But we have we've over the last number of months nominated a liaison point in each regional assembly to act as the bridge between the Irish Regions Office and the regional assembly and the local authorities. So Derval Brennan in Southern Regional Assembly acts as our liaison point, and then we liaise with, so it's slightly different in the Southern Regional Assembly area, because you have the established European Territorial Cooperation Network, which Rose and Karen are going to talk about later, and they will tell you how that works. But that's our mechanism for liaising with the local authorities. We've been holding these roadshows, and this is the third one. So we've had a meeting with the other two regional assemblies in the last couple of weeks. So we're continuing to do these, and if some people haven't been available, some councils haven't been available, we've done then separate ones for them. We're holding then bi-monthly national delegation meetings with our Committee of the Regions members, and each meeting we try to have a guest speaker to give them an insight on a certain EU policy area. So this week we're having a meeting with them, and our speaker is going to be talking about the EU Green Deal and the climate change challenges for Ireland. We're also then continuing to analyse the new cohesion policy regulations and looking at what they will mean for local and regional authorities, particularly for the regional assemblies, because their SRA and the Northwest Regional Assembly will be acting as managing authorities. So we're looking at the regulations and ensuring that we understand and that we can provide information back to the regional assemblies so that they can feed views into the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. We've been responding on behalf of the Irish delegation to the Committee of the Regions to public consultations on the shape of the new programmes, and we've been supporting regional assemblies with their preparations for the new funding round. Colleagues are also involved in some of the EU and the national just transition work, which is mainly going to affect the Midlands area. We're also renewing our relationships with the Irish MEPs. As I said, we have been meeting with them. We've been involved in helping them with queries on funding. They've asked us if we would give them some briefings on EU funding programmes. So we'll probably do that when the new programmes get up and running. And then we're seeking opportunities for showcasing your work. So we recently held the European Week of Regions and Cities seminar. We were lucky to get chosen as an official event, and we were delighted that we had Limerick City and County Council showcasing their work on smart cities and citizen engagement at that event. So all of our updates are available on our website, and we would kindly ask you to subscribe to our mailing list. So we can't bombard you with information due to the data protection regulations. So if you would be so kind as to subscribe to that, that would be great. So what I'm going to do now is just have a very brief update on some of the current policy issues which are affecting Irish regions, and before I move into the funding programmes. So some of this you'll be familiar with and some maybe more new to you. So where are we in terms of EU affairs and what's happening? Well, obviously the big conversation continues to be around the new budget, commonly known as the multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years. So as you'll know, the European budget operates on a 7-year basis. The negotiations are ongoing, almost at conclusion, but obviously, as you'll have read in the press, number of member states blocking any agreement on that for the moment. you know, and these budget negotiations are ongoing within an environment of a reduced budget and the pandemic. So the loss of the UK, and then the current issues of the pandemic, obviously, as well. Cohesion policy funding then coming out of that is the one that we're most keeping our eye on. And we have the REACT EU, the EU Recovery Package, the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, and then Just Transition. So that's kind of the package of funding, and I'll come back to that in a little bit in terms of what the impact for Ireland. In terms then of the policy priorities, which have a strong regional focus, a lot of talk going on recently and will continue around the Conference on the Future of Europe and citizens' engagement. And a lot of work has been done over the last number of months about citizens' view. Well, it already had been ongoing before the pandemic, and then since the pandemic, it's been going on around the EU's response to the pandemic and how do citizens feel the EU have been dealing with it. The Conference on the Future of Europe is a initiative by the Commission President to look at a reflection on the structures and the future of Europe. It will take 2 years when it finally kicks off, and it will be looking at how citizens get more engaged with the EU. It will be calling on local and regional authorities to ensure that citizens are consulted on the future shape of Europe. So you may see coming down the line opportunities and initiatives to encourage you as local authorities to get involved in citizen engagement, so democratic or participatory democracy, I should say, as they call it. The Green Deal. The Green Deal is an initiative by the EU right across. It's a cross-policy application, so it comes across all of the policy areas. Everything that's being done now is to ensure that the EU is planning for a resource-efficient and competitive economy. The plans, so there's no funding as such dedicated to the Green Deal. There are funding programs which will take the Green Deal into account. So, but it's kind of like a cross policy initiative that ensures that all the work that is ongoing within the EU, all policies and programs integrate this the Green Deal approach. So it has action plans to boost the efficient use of resources by moving to a clean circular economy and seeking to restore biodiversity and cut pollution. The digital single market then continues to be an important policy area as well in terms of supporting digital transformation, and that's, you know, coming in all shapes and sizes now, and there's been a particular focus on on education and digital education, and obviously in the context of the pandemic, that's been moving more to the fore. The farm to fork strategy, so the EU's common agricultural policy, represents a significant change in farm policy at EU level. So the strategy aims to reward farmers, fishermen and other operators in the food chain who have already undergone the transition to sustainable practices, and it wants then to enable the transition for others and create opportunities for business. So obviously, as you can imagine, and given the size of the rural sector in Ireland, this is a contentious issue for Ireland to get right. So we have been in regular liaison with the Irish government representatives within the Perm Rep for the latest thinking on that. Brexit, obviously, and all of the ongoing discussions, potential deal, no deal, all of the implications of that. We have a very, very good line of communication with the colleagues in the Perm Rep on that, and our elected members are heavily involved. And as obviously, as you can imagine, as Irish members, they're asked practically on a weekly basis for their input into that. Then research and innovation. You know, a strong focus on building a strong innovation pipeline across Ireland, looking at smart specialisation, regional smart specialisation, and the impact and the availability of funding and the role of local and regional authorities in those funding programmes, quite often seen as specifically more for the university sector, which of course it is, but also looking at where the impact can be in terms of how local authorities can get involved in that. So then moving on to a little bit of an update on the funding programmes, the current programmes and the post-2020. So I'm not going to focus too much on the current funding programme, only other than to say that the shared management funds, so the funds that are coming into Ireland, which are directly managed then in Ireland by in terms of the European Regional Development Fund, they're managed through operational programmes which are run by the Southern Regional Assembly and the Northwest Regional Assembly. So in the overall planning, the programmes are allocated their funding. The management is done between the European Commission and the member states and that's all put together in a national partnership agreement, how that's going to happen, and then operational programmes flow out of that. So for the current programming period, Ireland has received about 1.2 billion, and I just tell you that because it'll be slightly less in the new funding period. So sorry, just having a problem with the screen. Oh, here we go. Okay, so in terms then of, I mean, I'm sure most people are familiar with European Regional Development funding and where it comes from, but just a little bit of the background of it. So European Regional Development is all about cohesion policy. That's the backbone of European Regional Development, if you like. So cohesion policy in the EU is about promoting a more balanced, a more sustainable territorial development. And it's a broader concept than just regional policy, because regional policy is specifically linked to European Regional Development funding and operates at regional level. So the cohesion policy is the overall pot, which includes regional development, includes social funds, and it includes European territorial cooperation programmes. At the moment, the draft EU budget for 21 to 27 outlines that instead of the 1.2 billion that Ireland got last time, it's likely to get about 1.195 billion. So slightly less for all of its array of cohesion policy funding programmes. So ERDF, ESF Plus and the ETC programmes. So in terms of European Regional Development funding, this is then the programme which is about strengthening economic and social cohesion by correcting imbalances in regions. And for the next 7 years, Ireland is expected for that one programme, so out of the 1.195 billion, for the European Regional Development Fund, Ireland is likely to have an allocation, it's not confirmed, but of around 396 million. And how that will be divided out across Ireland, as David said, is being worked through at the moment, and the 3 regional assemblies are very actively involved in the discussions around what that's going to look like. And as David said, funding follows policy, and that's the message we've been collectively giving to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in terms of there are regional spatial economic strategies, and that funding should follow the policy that is already in place. Given the EU measures the relative wealth through GNI of each of the regions that are eligible for ERDF funding, and they take that at a point in time over a 3-year period, and the northwest region of Ireland will be a region in transition in this funding period. which means that the co-financing rate that they will receive is 60%. The Eastern and Midland and the Southern region are more developed regions, so their co-financing rate is 40%. So in terms of how that then is worked out, then basically means for the Southern region and the Eastern and Midland region, EU financing would be 40%, and co-financing from a national source will then obviously have to be 60%. Okay, so what do we know so far about Ireland's plan for this operational programme? So it's managed by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, and they have a partnership group, and the 3 regional assemblies are sitting on that in terms of what will be how that's coming together and how that's pulled together. So basically the direction of travel is very much determined by regulations and also by the European Commission's country report for Ireland. So every year the Commission provide a country report on progress on meeting EU objectives, and that shapes what goes into the European Regional Development Operational Programme. So for the policy objectives for the next 7 years, there was a list of 5 to choose from. Ireland had to choose. Basically, there are quota, or there are stipulations around how much has to go into a smarter Europe and a greener Europe. So Ireland have chosen a smarter Europe, a greener Europe, and a Europe closer to its citizens. So smarter Europe, obviously around innovation, digitalisation, and support to small and medium-sized enterprises. Greener Europe, about implementing the Paris Agreement, investing in energy transition and renewable energy. So not, you know, it's not a shock that that would be the focus given the Green Deal and all of the work that the EU is doing on that side. A Europe closer to its citizens then is about supporting locally led development strategies and sustainable urban development. So potentially opportunities in there, particularly for local authorities. Our public consultation was held during the summer, at the end of the summer, on how that looked, and I hope that many of you responded to that. And then, as David said, in the last number of weeks, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform have announced that the North West Regional Assembly and the Southern Regional Assembly will be the managing authorities for the new programme period, with an enhanced role for the Eastern and Midlands Regional Assembly. So then I'm going to quickly move on to European Territorial Cooperation, which I know you're probably more familiar with because you're probably participating in some of it. But just to give you an overview of what's coming down the line in 2021 to 27, you're probably fairly familiar, and I know Breda will talk later about the Ireland-Wales programme. At this moment in time, that programme isn't going ahead because of Brexit. But maybe Breda will have more information on that. But anyway, the other ones so European Territorial Cooperation comes in the form of cross-border participation, transnational collaboration, or interregional cooperation. So for the next programming period, we will have, well, on the island of Ireland, there'll be a Peace Plus programme, obviously mainly for Northern Ireland and the border region of Ireland. However, what we are aware of is that that programme will be wider and is likely to take in larger swathes of other parts of Ireland in that programme. So that incorporates what would have been formerly the Peace programme and the former Interreg cross-border programme. So that's potentially opportunities for participation right across the island, but we're not sure yet in terms of what things that will incorporate. There's the Interreg Northwest Europe programme, which is focused on, and the contact point is based within the Southern Regional Assembly, and that's looking at France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and a few other places. The Northern Periphery and Arctic programme then is looking at the west coast of Ireland, Scotland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland and Greenland, and then the Atlantic Area Programme, which is looking at all of those regions from Ireland right down to Portugal that are facing the Atlantic. And then the Interreg Europe Programme, which is more about a policy exchange. So you can get more, there'll be more information available for all of these programmes, but just to say they're the type of programmes that allow you to participate with other partners across different member states, and must have and will have a number of priorities similar to the ERDF priorities, and certainly in line with EU policy areas. Just to say then that the European Territorial Cooperation Programmes in Ireland, every member state has contact points. I've given you here the list of who manages what. So if you are sitting in Kerry or Cork and you want to get involved in the Atlantic Area Programme or the Northern Periphery Programme, the contact point is in the Northwest Regional Assembly. So don't want you to think that you can't contact these people if they're not in your area. The contact points operate across the island and across all of the regions. So if you're interested in any of these programs, the contact points are there. Just a word then on a new slice of funding that we're looking at very closely to see what's going to happen with. So in July of this year, the European Council agreed to create a special Brexit adjustment reserve of €5 billion. You may have read last week in the Irish Times, there was some talk about this and about how the French are hoping to get a big take of this funding, if you like. So at the moment, we understand DG Budget are leading the discussions around this, but there has been talk that the management of this will move to DG Regio, and that in itself would indicate then that there's a potential for this to be allocated for regional policy funding. So we're not sure of the detail yet, we're following it, but nothing has been agreed because apparently the European Commission are not willing to take a decision and publish a proposal until they understand the full terms of the UK's departure. And obviously, as we know, there's no deal agreed yet. So until we see a deal or everybody walking away with no deal, we won't see this coming out. But we do understand that it may be allocated as a top-up to the structural investment funds, so to the regional policy pot, and it might use the same mechanisms. But as I said, we don't know. Now, in terms of how the Commissioner are going to allocate this, we understand there are 3 scenarios on the table. So one would be an ex post compensation of costs. So member states would apply for the reserve to ask for compensation ex post, so certain sectors, and the Commission then would manage the reserve and disperse the funds at their discretion. So that's one possible way. Another way of allocating it is an ex-ante allocation based on an allocation methodology, which would follow a similar logic to cohesion policy or the Just Transition Fund. So this might include trade exposure, the impact on fisheries, or even on the number of member states residing in the UK. Which would be an interesting one for Ireland. And then the third scenario we understand is a top up to existing programmes under shared management, so under the cohesion policy framework and the ERDF. So that's one to watch and one to see how Ireland will do out of that. And obviously from newspaper reports, the French are wanting to cash in on that in terms of the impact on fisheries. So we'll see how that's going to go. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these funding programmes, but just to say I've pulled together a list of other funding programmes that might be of interest to local authorities, and particularly maybe mention the Life Plus funding programme, which is one that funds environmental measures. But you can see the list there, and at your own leisure you can go through those, and if you have any other questions you can come back to me. I'm all conscious I've been talking for half an hour, and I know you've had a lot of information, and if you're not familiar with EU funding, you might be thinking, where do I start? with EU funding. So just a few slides for me to finish on how to get started and how we, as the Irish Regions European Office and the Southern Regional Assembly, want to work with you to build this partnership and to get information, share information with each other so that we can give you a more tailored service. So over the last number of weeks working on these presentations, more things have come to my mind. So how have I organised this is how local authorities can get started with funding and some internal considerations to think of within your council. So, I mean, the first thing to say is, I'm assuming you have a strategic plan or a corporate plan, and I would say think about the key projects that are in these plans and think, can EU funding contribute to delivering these? Then I also think really important is to think about resources, and you'll hear from Ronan and Terry later about the importance of having a dedicated resource for driving and leading these projects. I also think it's important to make sure that you're collaborating across departments in terms of the different thematic areas, because sometimes a funding opportunity might be relevant for economic development, but it also might be relevant for your people dealing with waste policy or the circular economy. So there needs to be that interaction across the council to make sure that everybody's aware of what everyone's involved in. Then I also think it's really important to ensure appropriate expertise, collaboration and systems across the entire council. So I know from big organisations that quite often you may have an EU officer and that person gets left with all of the work. You may just have an economic development officer and that person gets left with it all. But in terms of accessing EU funding, and people say it's complex, and it is, it's about how you organise all of your council to be involved. So if it's HR, if it's procurement, if it's finance, if it's your communication department, are they involved? Are they aware of all of the requirements that are required for being involved in EU funding programs? It could be the logos, it could be recruitment, it could be about ensuring you have the right number of quotes and you're using the right system, and also in terms of the finance department, the claims and the first level of control and all of the financial checks that need to be done. Are all of those parts of your organisation fit for purpose in terms of managing EU funding? Then also importantly, in most of these programs, there's an element of match funding. So how much and how are you going to source that? And can staff time, which quite often it can be used as a source of match funding, which means then you're not out an awful lot of money. Then in terms of joining appropriate networks, what are the time implications, the cost implications and the resources that are needed to be active participants in funding networks? Then in terms of some of the external factors to consider, do you need partners? So that will determine what kind of project you're going to put together. Where do your partners need to come from? Are they local, are they national, or at the EU level? And quite often, and anyone that's heard me talking will always hear me say, sometimes it's about looking in your back door. Are you working with your local university, your local IT college, your other maybe third sector partners who are also very able partners in EU funding? And are these the people that you could be working with that will give you the opportunity to be involved? So that's as well as looking then at your European counterparts. If you have a project and you think it's suitable for EU funding, you need to identify the range of funding programs that you might want to explore. And there is plenty of help and support available. So talk to the experts, the national contact points based within the Irish Regions Office and the Southern Regional Assembly. Ensure then that your project fits with a relevant call for application. So just because you like the funding program or you think it's maybe an easy one, is there a relevant call? And is that one that you can that is suitable for you to apply to? And then talk to others who have been involved. If you're approached by another partner, which quite often happens, you might be at a conference and you've met someone from Spain and they ask you to be involved. And I think if you've got that kind of connection, what you need to do is go back and think, is this a strategic fit for my organisation, or is it just a nice to do? And if it's a strategic fit, yes, get involved. But if it's not, don't make it fit if it's not the right one. And then in terms of joining appropriate networks, I think it's important to think which ones are the appropriate ones for me to join. There's lots, and lots of people will take your money, but you've got to be sure it's the right one for you. So in terms of next steps, what I'd like to propose is that, you know, this is, as I said, a partnership, and I know the Southern Regional Assembly have already conducted an analysis of the EU projects in the councils to ascertain the levels of activity. So that's already been done, and we'll be working with them to review those and see where there might be opportunities coming from them. Then, if I have your agreement, we'll send out a little short questionnaire and ask you to review your strategic plans and provide us with some information about your key areas of interest. So that'd be your key policy areas, and then also information on maybe 2 to 3 key projects that you're thinking about that might require funding. And then we can explore where the best sources are. And then also that will allow us to provide you with more targeted and relevant funding and policy updates. And then in terms of the partnership, we would be really happy to work with Southern Regional Assembly in participating in the European Territorial Cooperation Network so that we can continue to give updates on policy and funding opportunities. So I'm almost finished, just this last concluding slide, which is to say funding, the EU funding and policy environment is a complex one, and you've probably already gathered that from the amount of information I've given you this morning. Projects need to be strategic, they need to show added value, and they need to be linked to local, national and EU policy. So there needs to be a rationale and a really strong reason for doing them, or for applying for funding. And I say here, applying for EU funding takes time, commitment, physical and financial resources, but also receiving EU funding does. That's when the real hard work begins, when you get the money into your hand, or you get the letter of offer and you think, oops, now I've got to deliver this, and that takes all of that time, commitment and resources as well. And, you know, just to say that many factors are beyond your control. You can make a really good application, but receiving funding will depend on the amount of funding available, the nature of the calls, the geography of the programme area, and the eligibility and assessment criteria, which none of us have any control over. Understanding the EU policy arena is important so that you understand the funding arena. And participation has many benefits. It raises your profile, it showcases your work on the EU stage, and it leads to further engagement. But as I said, it is complex. But support is available. Southern Regional Assembly, Irish Region's European Office, the network of contact points are available for helping you to make good applications. And just to say, we're here to help you understand. So, and that's the contact details of myself and my 2 colleagues, Agatha and Helena. So thank you very much. Sorry, that was rather long, but I hope you found it interesting. And now we're going to move on to Breda.
Good morning. Yeah, just 1 second. Started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Breda Kern. I work in the Southern Regional Assembly, and I'm a Project Development Officer for the Ireland Wales Programme, the European Territorial Cooperation Programme. Today I'm going to talk to you about the roles of contact point and the Project Development Officer, and tell you how we can assist you to apply for EU funding. As Teresa said, the process is complex. We can help you get through it. So, the first thing to do is to identify the contact point or the Project Development Officer. Teresa has just given these out to you, but anyway, you can find out their names and their details through the programme website, or you can contact the Joint Secretariat and they will give you the information. So how can we assist you? We can provide information about the programme and the programme requirements. For example, how many partners are necessary. And you can contact your project development officer or contact point by email or phone to discuss your proposal, or you can arrange for us to come to your local authority to give a presentation to the councillors and staff. Contact point can help you find a partner and assist you with your application. And if your project is approved for funding, we will monitor and provide assistance over the life of the project. The amount of assistance provided varies from programme to programme, with some programmes providing more assistance than others. In Ireland and Wales, we tend to give a lot of assistance, but we do the lead partner, and not only, we also help the other Irish partners if the lead is Welsh. So what information can we provide? Well, we can tell you about the national regulations, what costs you can include in a claim and what costs you cannot include. Contact point, project development officer, can tell you about the programme's priorities and themes. Priorities and themes, as she said, is usually similar across the programmes, but there are variations. A priority on climate change is common in most programmes, but the focus may be different. In Ireland and Wales, the priority is on climate change adaptation, whereas I know in other programmes, the focus is on reducing carbon emissions. The contact point can give you information about the amount of funding that is available for each priority and theme, and the ERDF grant rate, and how much match funding you will need to provide. Grant rate varies from programme to programme. For Ireland and Wales, it is 80% in the current programme and 65% for North West Europe. The contact point and project development officer can also tell you about the application process. It tells about the calls for proposals, the opening and closing dates, and if the call is a targeted call focusing on a particular priority or theme. And we can help you to find a suitable partner. So if you have a project idea but do not know how to find a partner from one of the other countries, using the network, the contact point network, your project development officer contact point can help you find a suitable partner in another country. Or you might meet a partner at one of the networking events which are organised in each country by the Joint Secretariat. Some programmes have a partner search facility on their website. So the amount of support provided by contact points and project development officers is different. So in this slide, I will focus on the support provided by contact point. If necessary, the contact point can help you to develop your proposal to ensure that it fits with the programme requirements. An Irish contact point will only give assistance to a project with an Irish lead partner. If the lead partner is from another country, the contact point in that country will provide the assistance. In the early stages of writing your application, the contact point will give you feedback on it. In some programmes, when you're further along the application process, there's the Joint Secretariat that will give you assistance then. And some programmes arrange workshops for the applicants to help them to complete their applications. Generally, you would have had to submit a draft application before you're invited to the workshop. And where the application is submitted online, the contact point can help you guide you through the process. Now I'll just talk about the support provided by a project development officer. Contact points, the project development officer will also help you to develop your proposal so that it fits with the programme requirements. The Ireland Wales programme has 3 steps in the application process. The project development officer will provide support and give feedback throughout the whole process. For the current Ireland Wales programme, the project development officer is also involved in appraising the application and carries out the first check in the appraisal process. The project steering committee, this is the committee who selects the projects for funding, have made recommendations on your application when they are considering it. The project development officer will pass this information back to the applicants and ensure that these issues are addressed in the next stage of the application. So assuming you've gotten through the application process and your project is approved, what happens then? The contact points will attend events any events organised in Ireland by the project partners to monitor the progress of the project. And in Ireland and Wales, we also hold regular review meetings with the lead partner. These are held every 3 or 6 months, depending on the stage of the project. And at the review meetings, we discuss progress of the project, publicity, expenditure, and any other issues that the partners might wish to discuss. We will also assist you if it's necessary to make any changes to the project's business plan, or if you need to move money between the budget lines. And then at the end of the project, we will help the lead partner to close it successfully. There's my contact details. And thank you. I'm not going to talk too much about Brexit, as I really don't know that much about it. It's a bit chaotic at the moment, but we do know that UK government are not interested in ETC programs, so it doesn't look like there will be another Ireland program. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Breda. I think that was really useful and a really good overview of all of the support that the contact points can provide. And I think, you know, it's fair to say that contact points, their job is to help applicants, and it's a resource for everyone to use. So no question is too basic and no question is too difficult, because if they don't know the answer, they'll know people who will know the answer. So I think that's a really useful summary of all of the supports, both all the way through the project. I think that's important to say as well, that it's not just in the getting the money, it's the whole way through as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass now over to Ronan Jingles, who's EU Affairs Coordinator at Cork City Council. And we're delighted to have both Cork and Limerick here today presenting. I think this gives you a very good overview of the importance of having a resource that's dedicated to EU funding and EU affairs. And also, you know, Ronan will be able to highlight and share some of the successes. Both himself and Terry will talk about the successes they've had from their roles and how that enhances everything that a local authority is doing. So thank you for being here, Ronan, and thank you for giving me time, and I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. I do well to share my screen, never mind some experiences. I'm going to
yeah, I know what you mean.
Minimize the blockages here a little bit. Hope that
at the bottom, you have a little thing on the bottom that says share screen.
Can you see the screen itself?
Yeah.
So yeah. I have, there we go. Okay, is that unobstructed?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I'm one of these dedicated resources that Teresa spoke about, and I'm going to give you some, I suppose, reflections and experiences. As much about my time in Brussels, 10 years over there, where Teresa sits at the moment, and indeed, like Breda, I was a national contact point on Interreg prior to that. So I'm in the relatively little time we have, I'm going to try and give you a whistle-stop tour of what we're about in Cork in European terms. So not much opportunity for self-promotion. And then move on to look at coordination, what it means. And thank you for the vote of confidence, I suppose, on behalf of Terry and myself, being chosen to present in this best practice, your words, not ours, I suppose. And then move on to what we've done as a council in terms of moves towards a more strategic approach, the whys and the hows. And I don't know if I'll have time to get into the mechanics and the details, but you'll have the slides to take away from yourself. And I don't want to eat into Terry's time or Rose or Karen's after that. But Cork is, of course, a European city. You see it in our guerrilla street art. It's a welcoming city that says bienvenue and Willkommen, and if you the national anthem here is Sultans of Ping's Where's My Jumper, which cites Karl Marx down in the People's Park, where I think he was inspired by the People's Republic. But more concretely, in the last 6 months or so. You see the example of the alfresco dining as part of a reimagined Cork on Princess Street and adjoining streets between South Mall and Oliver Plunkett Street. And I take that, although it's not a European project, it's tantamount to dealing with learning from elsewhere, looking at different approaches to how we organise our city and adopting them into practice on the ground. We're an outward-looking city, striving to be world-class. It's a major objective of our new corporate plan, and within that, there is a strategic objective in relation to European affairs framed as European projects, ostensibly under driving economic and sustainable growth, but important to realise that this is tentacles right throughout the organisation and across all manner of the objective areas. European affairs serves to promote what we're about on the international stage as a city as well. I think European and international are basically interchangeable terms. And we get, with some of the natural advantages of being a city, we can avail of quite a bit of recognition and validation about what we're about in terms of rankings. Some of them are more subjective than others. Our friendliness as a city, generally and in business terms. Our economic potential has been lauded in tech terms, and our culture and creativity seen as being particularly vibrant. And you can bet that these are the kind of things I'm going to try and push the envelope on in terms of development of projects and putting ourselves out there. We've also enjoyed designations from UNESCO as a learning city and an accreditation from the World Health Organization as a healthy city. And these are platforms to sort of enhance our leadership role within the community through outreach and collaboration with other actors and organizations in the wider Cork city region area. And all of this feeds into our project work. So it's important to take the positives out of international reputation. We've also won some awards, for example, the Sanctuary Runners, a very Cork-grown project on inclusivity of migrants. And we may well, all things being equal, try and pursue other awards into the future where we feel it'll bring proper recognition to work where well deserved on our part in working in tandem with local organizations. And these are just some events that have been held within the city on a European or national footing, major conferences from Startup Nations to Cities Against Drugs, UNESCO Learning City. European Maritime Day, unfortunately, was an early victim of COVID back in May, which is a great disappointment to everyone. But next year we'll host EBAN, which is a major investment and entrepreneurship event. And we've also taken part in the European Week of Regions and Cities, as Teresa cited Limerick. We took part in with two of our projects, Playful Paradigm and Cult Create, presented in Brussels back in September, or virtual in Brussels back in September. So as for our engagement in programs, aside from the structural and investment funds with ERDF and ESF, we've competed for and won projects in 10 separate funding categories over the last 5 years or so, which is a pretty good hit rate, I think. We haven't, not 100%, we haven't hit all programs either. We haven't managed to get a live program going, which is regrettable, but we'll maybe try and get that going in the next one. But it's a pretty good spread, all things considered. And project-wise, you only have to look at the logos to see the extent of activity. It's a real array. We've had, by my count at least, 28 separate transnational projects involving partnership activities, recently or ongoing, so since 2016. When I was in Brussels, the local authority that I worked most closely with was Donegal County Council, who at the time had, I think I counted 14 projects at one time in 2017. So I think we've probably surpassed them at this stage in terms of what we have ongoing. Our projects are of various sizes and extents of commitment and indeed of funding. Some are very small, some of them are quite reasonable 3-figure sums. 20 of them in all have been co-funded by the EU. In 18 of these, we're a full project partner, which involved all the project work of work packages and financial management and claims and all those complications. And there are 3 within there, though they're not funded. They're very significant engagement in targeted expert networks provided by the European Commission, which have been put to good effect in terms of tailored access to advice. For example, in the development of our soon to be launched digital strategy. So all that is hugely valuable. And then there are smaller projects within the mix there where we're a key enabler for UCC, where we're a stakeholder to the Regional Assembly on 2 energy projects, or where we're doing advisory work on behalf of other consortia and others in the background. So a lot going on, and then on the side you'll see some of our networks and our work with the Committee of the Regions. And I'd love to take credit for this, but it's only the more recent projects in the last 18 months that are in any way, shape or form my doing in terms of winning approval. It's the work of other people really who got us there from 2016, 17 and 18. Some of those projects are now ending. So as I say, time doesn't allow me to go into the detail of them no more than an overview. What I'm going to give you is a perspective, is a helicopter view, I suppose. But I'd be happy to put you in touch when you have the slides with the individual project managers who can give you chapter and verse. I don't think it's helpful, generally speaking, when you're given that we're searching for a more integrated approach to project development and management across the board. It's not helpful to cluster things thematically, but for the ease of the presentation, this is what we have. We have projects in economic development in relation to, there's 2 projects funded by through the Assembly, or Mary Elm's Bridge and Marina Park, which is it's underway at this moment in time. A project on the port relocation, and a project to inform the Docklands redevelopment, which is really what most of our activity really revolves around as a City Council at this point in time. Then we have projects on the digital and smart approach, including that influencing of the new digital strategy. We have a plethora of engagement on the energy footing. This is our most prolific area. The bulk of this is within housing maintenance, social housing retrofitting to bring the fabric of buildings up to scratch. And a number of those being through Horizon 2020. Some are very new to the point where I don't even have a logo to offer you. Then we have projects in the realm of economic development and innovation, supporting the ecosystems or direct support to SMEs, workplace innovation, and cultural and creative industry orientation towards tourism. And our final suite is the deals in social, community, heritage, and learning, where we have projects in social innovation, social enterprise, the rehabilitation of heritage assets for tourism, public space design and planning with a human focus, including a really interesting project on using play as a focus of that, and an initiative on the city and the university and improving the relationship there, looking at it through a social inclusion lens. We also are involved in a number of networks. Teresa mentioned networks in her contribution there. And this is interesting in that it's a different form of engagement. It's paid, but it's less complicated in terms of the commitments. You don't have an action plan to live up to. It's an a la carte involvement. It's a basis for connection with peer cities to identify shared issues and best practice, and perhaps build future project partnerships. And I just bring your attention to one engagement we're involved in through the ICLE Network on Local Governments for Sustainability, which is the Mannheim message, where we recently signed up as a pledge supporting a movement where local authorities would assume more of a role in delivering the EU's Green Deal strategy towards climate neutrality by 2050. And so that, to my mind, that placed Cork in the vanguard of some of the most sustainably minded cities in Europe. And it's something that can only be beneficial in terms of profile raising as a green city of European significance, which should yield dividends down the road in terms of funding, designations, etc. We also have the Committee of the Regions, as spoken of earlier. We have 2 members, Councillors Kieran McCarthy and Deirdre Ford, which is quite a haul really from the 9-person national delegation. They've maintained their places from the last round when I was in Brussels. So I'm trying to work more proactively with them with a view to particularly contributing to opinions, the reports within the Committee of the Regions, which try to influence European legislation with the other institutions to the attention of the Parliament, the Council and the Commission. So the most recent one was on steps to reinforce the creative sector in a post-COVID environment. The coordinator does a bit of work on the implementation side with the projects that are already in play. I've myself had to step in and provide a bit of in extremis management where there have been gaps and staff changes just to keep things going. But generally, it's a case of keeping things on track. Because so many projects, it's a case of doing this at something of a hands-off distance, but working with the individual project managers just to assist delivery, to assure an organizational context. And I think that's important because projects can otherwise tend to go in one direction or another, depending on where they're located within the organization. So the role there is just to keep things on track, monitor progress, do regular, time permitting, check-ins on a one-to-one basis and review documentation and see all is well, provide advice as may be required in terms of where the project is at and what the project manager needs. That might be on financial management, claims assistance, working just to promote what's coming out of the project in terms of outcomes and outputs. The wider usage within the organization is important, and messaging and PR. And on a more collective scale, we have an EU team of our project managers, which is a forum for regular gatherings, collective discussion, platforms for capacity building, which David mentioned at the outset, trying to be more able and ready to manage projects as best we can. So there we seek to identify the collective needs of the organization in those terms. So it's quite a portfolio, really, if I can use a rather fancy word. We have 17 projects ongoing or about to begin. 5 of them are practically brand new, so that's a job in itself to roll those out. 6 of them wound up in the last 9 months or so. 7 more will end in the next 12 months, which by my reckoning leaves about 10 which will have some fuel in the tank going into 2022. So it's a conveyor belt, really. Frankly, it's a bit difficult to keep track on sometimes, and I appreciate just numerically, it's if you're coming at this relatively fresh perspective as a local authority, it's a very daunting example. But this is the work of a few years of focus and groundwork and inspiration and perspiration, and let's be frank, the alignment of the stars of European opportunity and approach from somebody, perhaps a good bit of promotion and communication in-house, somebody having the individual interest to take the bull by the horns and the capacity to run with it and putting the effort into the application, and then luck is the pixie dust, I suppose, that goes on top of that. So we have, as you can see, we have very good coverage across the board in terms of the areas of activity. But to be honest, that's probably more by accident than design, and it's something that can present a challenge in terms of dispersal of activity throughout the organisation, and I'll try and come back to that. So we've been prolific, which is all well and good, and you might say, if it ain't broke, why fix it? But our successes have been ad hoc, by and large, and there's some applications that have not succeeded for one reason or another. The point is, there's been no overall plan, and there's only been a variable level of an organizational context in place in some of the projects until recently. And at least I have my own annual work plan now in place to try and push things along in a particular direction. So think of it in terms of an organic growth of projects. And I'm gonna labor a metaphor I haven't used in about 18 months here, but this is our EU garden where I spend a lot of my time both pruning and planting. And this is where, more or less, where I'd like to get it to in a before and after transformation, aware of the fact that in a COVID era, we're keener on rewilding than manicuring. But it's just to make the point that this is somewhere that has a real potential for the organisation as a feature. It's got fertile soil, it's south-facing aspect. It could add real value to the property that is Cork City Council if properly managed and maintained. That's my job. It's had lots of seeds planted in it over the years, some carefully by design, some more random, some scattered by pollinators parachuting in their seeds. It's very biodiverse, as you've seen, and I'm doing a disservice to the projects by the first image of weeds, because some of them are very fine specimens and they've bloomed and blossomed, ripened quite nicely, and now some of them are coming to the end of their life, and we have to see what to do with the roots that they've put down over the long term. But the point is, in the round, this arose in an unplanned sense, and it was left untended for some time. It ran a little wild, a bit overgrown. It was a bit like an allotment in a sense, in that there were different people doing their own thing in their own spaces. So there was fragmentation and no overall management. And indeed, there were even very small projects that I found when I took up this position. So it was like species that were unknown or something. There were even some mysterious invasive species that needed to be traced. The whole thing was very much in the shade, and so it needs a bit of exposure and appreciation and TLC. So that's my role to a T, is kind of to landscape it from something a bit tangled and off-putting into a green and pleasant space where staff would be minded to think about and even spend time in, which again is a very COVID sort of way of looking at it, and turn it into something that's well planned and flourishing, that we'll make use of, that'll be productive, that'll bear fruit. There's no point in it being ornamental. It has to actually serve a purpose, and that'll naturally renew like a hardy perennial, full of hardy perennials, and from my point of view, hopefully be relatively low maintenance. You can tell I'm not a gardener in real life because I'm asking far too much from a piece of the backyard. But you notice that it has a pathway there, and I think that's important as a means to navigate without getting bogged down. And you could think of it in terms of Hansel and Gretel equally, and throwing breadcrumbs behind them, so that you go into the forest, but you're able to come out of it again. So for some local authorities, obviously, this would more be a case of tending to a window box or turning scrub grass into a lawn if you don't have projects in place. I've been asked to sort of present an approach more in mind of developing projects from a relatively low base, a bit of a blank canvas. So my appointment 18 months ago was sort of a first step in ramping up the emphasis on coordination, which is not to say that there wasn't coordinated there. We did excellent work before that. But there was a sense that we needed to get more value out of our European experience. Coordination is about support, and it's about really teeing up opportunities for staff. So my mission is to be a focal point for all matters EU in the organisation, fostering interest throughout, trying to share targeted information on opportunities with the right people, joining up approaches. Essentially, I'm about informing and facilitating the organisation's access to and maximising the quality of its engagement in EU opportunities and initiatives, be they funded or otherwise, in a way that is whole of organisation and that clearly contributes to and informs how we deliver the objectives that are associated with developing Cork as a world-class city, as the corporate plan says. And that can be by reference to being sustainable, inclusive, resilient, competitive, connected, future-focused, ideally, all of these aims. And just now it's decided to stall on me. There we go. So that's about, as with the delivery aspect of project implementation, it's about providing hands-on assistance and advice as required with project development. Being the eyes and ears on Europe, looking at what's happening out there, monitoring a moving target, understanding the funding programs, providing insight, providing foresight, because being forewarned is forearmed. And you're also the external point of contact in all matters European, at least initially, in making connections and introductions, and then perhaps fading into the background. It's about reading between the lines, trying to find opportunity, trying to decipher jargon into layman's terms and explaining what it means, accepting sometimes opportunities can emerge in-house. It's about then communicating it within the organization, cultivating interest. That's the Evening Echo voice you'll be familiar with, statue on Patrick Street. And trying to sell the merits of potential engagement where it makes sense. And in doing so, trying to break down any silos that might present something of an impediment. It's about bringing the right people on board with project opportunities, bringing the opportunity to those right people, trying to go beyond the usual suspects who might be involved in European funding typically, and getting everyone to pull in the right direction. And ownership is one of the most crucial aspects there. You need to identify and nurture people with the interest and enthusiasm to run with the ideas, and I'll try and return to this quickly in a few months. It's also about removing hurdles. I'm being quite literal with some of my imagery here, in order to enable and facilitate opportunities, and trying to help with the process of the somewhat notorious administrative burden that is associated with EU projects, just trying to provide a hand up, not necessarily a handout, in trying to assume some of that burden onto your shoulders to make it less off-putting, because that can be a big issue. Now, persuasion isn't always easy. You're going to meet, as a coordinator, you're going to meet reticence, you're going to meet resistance perhaps. In Cork, I learned quickly that when somebody says, I will, yeah, what they really mean is I won't, no. It's just a quirk of Corkonian character and mentality. But for some people, European engagement it's going to be just too exotic, too complicated, too much to bear, and that's fine. You know, if the horse isn't thirsty, you can't make him drink. It might boil down to competing priorities and demands, lack of time, other resource constraints. It might be just the proposal is unsuitable or unworkable, or there is just simply a lack of interest. That's fine. You just drop it, and you have to move on to concentrate on something a bit more viable. Because in any event, part of the role is to critique. It's not to cheerlead. You need to be realistic, cast a jaundiced eye over proposals and ideas and notions, but you need to have an advisory say in proceedings and decision making for senior management. Let them know what you think about an idea's prospects, because if it doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell, it saves time and effort in the long run to nip it in the bud there and then. And a very important point is to ensure that the organisation has the right motivation in engaging in Europe. There's a tendency to look at things purely in the financial perspective. You need to balance that with the notion of learning and seeing things from a different perspective and seeing how that can be applied, because regardless of the purpose of any EU project, if it's looked through the prism of purely the financial support, if winning funding is the key concern, it runs the risk of being seen as an end in itself, and the project delivery that follows is then relegated to something that scarcely matters. So there's much more to do after this point in time. You need to implement, you need to use the opportunity competed for and won. You need to walk the talk. So the funding, it's a welcome enabler. It makes things possible in terms of hiring staff or undertaking research or small scale activities that otherwise wouldn't take part, but it's a means, not an end. It's not the main prize. And what the project needs to be about really is opportunities for learning, exchange of knowledge to broaden horizons, share experience, basically learn for the future to inform the development of your county or your city. And in the longer term, for me, it's all about, this is a broader strategic context of trying to raise the accessibility and the profile of European opportunities, promote them across the organization as a cross-directed issue of significance and potential, something to look towards when looking for inspiration, for solutions, or even for funding to deliver something. And it's something we need to work on as an organization, just trying to enhance the recognition of the potential contribution this can make, so it can at least be considered. And I'm conscious personally of needing to find the time to sit down with directors of service and SEOs from all directorates to try and understand their priorities over the coming 5 years. This ties in with what David was saying about identifying priorities, and perhaps we can work with the Regional Assembly with that in mind and to map them against the EU landscape as it emerges over the next few years to identify areas of particular opportunity. And this is true also in terms of identifying issues where approaches, techniques, solutions and innovations elsewhere in Europe can just be looked at as best practice and replicated in local circumstances without needing to have recourse to funding programs in particular. So conscious of taking quite a lot of time, I'm just going to fly through this and then hand over to Terry. We're at we have a timely opportunity now as we come to the future programs about to begin, notwithstanding all the delays that have been brought about by here. Boundary extensions took time to bed in and took people's attention. We've had COVID, of course. Brexit has slowed up the programming process, but we're now on the cusp, and it's an opportune time to reinvent how we look at our engagements, to put key modifications in place to gain more value out of Europe from the future, and to pay a bit more attention to the parts of project development and implementation that don't really get a lot of attention, which to my mind is the first stage, the idea and the consideration as to whether we should be involved in projects in the first place, not so much the bid application process or the implementation, which tend to get a relative amount of profile, but whether we should be there in the first place, and then the learning, the results and how we use that that comes out at the other end of the pipeline. And there's a role for support from a coordinator there, both before, during and after. So we have a more strategic approach now in place to bring about a change in our organizational culture, building on what we have, but moving more from quantity to quality in the long run, more structure, more coherence, a more comprehensive take on things from the outset, starting before signing up to project bids, to enable us to engage in a more efficient and a more beneficial manner. And this is really just in order that projects will solve problems, not create them, will introduce positive change to the organization, the things that are worth doing and doing well. And to do that, you need to ascertain upstream the relevance of the venture, the benefits that are going to accrue, the feasibility of the delivery, and then plan accordingly. And that takes time and investment and effort, and the committal of resources. So it needs to stack up, and it's not something that's done on a whim, because a lot can go wrong, really. I'm not going to labour the point about the problems that can arise with EU funding, everything from fuzziness to things being too left field, to things being unanchored, to activities being inconsequential. This can promote a lot of reticence and seem quite off-putting to management decisions. But you need to, my point is, you need to look before you leap. Avoid getting into the wrong kind of project, because it is a major commitment. You need to consider things without being rushed. You need to make sure that there's a real strategic value and identifiable purpose to the activity, that it fits like a jigsaw piece and doesn't create complications or unnecessary retrofitting work afterwards, that it yields results, that you know what's at the end of that queue, unlike people in communist Russia, and that there is a legacy coming at the end. The results is something that you can use going into the future, that it's measurable and credible, that you're not just purely speculating, that there's focus rather than a scattergun approach, mindful of the fact that less can be more sometimes. Again, the quantity things, that it's worthwhile, that it's realistic rather than a wild goose chase, and that it can serve multiple purposes, but these are understood right across the board where there's a nexus of policies involved. And that's where the whole of organization thing comes into play: coordinated, joined up thinking and communication, curbing solo runs, the tendency to run down blind alleys, avoiding over-dependence on individuals, because there is no plan B then if somebody moves on and there's nobody there to run the project in their absence. And more positively, engaging in more teamwork, sewing a project idea into the fabric of the organization, driving more inputs, strengthen the bid and more outputs from the project at the other end to line up useful actions and outcomes. From behind the curtain to know your stakeholders in advance and their role. So before the performance, during rehearsals, really look out there and see who needs to be involved so that you're not playing to an empty theatre, especially post-COVID, once the project gets underway. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Appreciate the challenges and demands involved. And then resource the extra workload that's invariably going to come about, because well-planned, managed and resourced projects maximize the prospects for successful project delivery and development. And that comes into play before the bid is submitted, as well as afterwards. So there needs to be the investment of staff time needs to be warranted so that you're not a victim of the success. And that ties in with financially planning things well, properly constructed budgets to allow appropriate activity. For example, you might need expertise as part of external expertise as part of the mix, maximizing the yield to be derived from the funding, clever use of sunken costs for match funding, assignment of multiple staff in some shape or form, a percentage of time to apportion that match funding gap, I suppose, because there's no sense in turning a funded opportunity into an unexpected cost because you haven't really done the due diligence. So we work closely to try and do that. And all of this should lead to hopefully manageable delivery and projects that are ready to go once approved, that don't come as a nasty shock, a fail to prepare to fail way. So I'm going to I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to wind it up there. We look for consistency. We, just to say, have started a PMO approach, which is a way to grasp the nettle for project managers, particularly new ones, rather than imposing a straitjacket upon them. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon for our point of view. And it's somewhat difficult visually to go into the diagram, so I'm going to leave them with you. We could come back to them if there was more time at the end, and I'd happily do so. But we've devised, yeah. Yeah,
I'm going to have to ask you to conclude, Ronan, just because we're running way behind time, and I want to make sure that we have some opportunity for questions. But I appreciate the amount of work you've been doing and how excellent all of this looks. But just in the interest of time, we'll have to move on. If that's okay.
So just to say, there are two processes just to illustrate it. On the left, the project idea development as far as ideally approval by the program authorities. And then the second one on the right is the actual implementation of an approved project. And you'll see a little bit more about each of those. And our process, it centers on a process just to assess projects which are fully documented and justified as ideas, and then assessed at senior management level within them. You'll find details within that. So I will leave that there. You can come back to me at any stage if you have inquiries about individual projects. So sorry for going over the time.
It's okay, Ronan. No, thank you very much. That was excellent, and I'm absolutely delighted to see the range of projects that you're involved in across all the different policy areas, and your advice and what you're doing internally is exactly what I think, is really good learning for other local authorities. So thank you for it, and apologies for having to move you on. But just kind of conscious of time, and people will have only set aside a certain amount of time for this morning. So I know your slides will be available, and I just then very quickly want to move on to Terry Conley, who's an EU Programme Manager at Limerick City and County Council, who's going to highlight the experience and the excellent work that's also going on in Limerick City and County Council. So over to you, Terry. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Teresa. And just to say that thanks for this opportunity to talk to everyone. And thanks also for the work that the IREO and the Southern Regional Assembly have been doing over the last year to start bringing together people like myself and Ronan and yourselves to start looking at this from a real regional perspective. I think we're starting to see that pay off now, and gives me great optimism for the future, particularly on alignment around SDGs and objectives like that. So very quickly, this is one of my last chances to point out that we're a European Green Leaf winner 2020, and there's only 1 month left in 2020. In one sense, we're very thankful there's only 1 month left in 2020, but in another, we'd be sad to move on to European Green Leaf 2021. Also, we launched our new logo this year, which is Limerick Atlantic Edge European Embrace, showing that really Limerick sees its future as I suppose not just being on the edge of Europe after Brexit, but being very much at the heart of Europe. And I think our links with the IREO will help build on that European embrace going forward. So I suppose I've, like Ronan, I spent a while in Brussels, and I worked in UCD for a while as well. So I have a few different perspectives to bring to how European funding can work. I remember when we were in Brussels, like all this money goes out and from the core of the union, and we think magic happens when it goes out, but that's not always the case. And I remember also when I worked in UCD, it was very much I suppose because of different cuts over the last 15 years, that academia has become more and more reliant on European funding. So it's really a factory for churning out applications sometimes. And then when I was talking to companies about European funding, particularly SMEs, sometimes with the paperwork involved, as Ronan pointed out with his slide from Father Ted, it was my money. I just didn't want to fill out the paperwork. SMEs can be very hostile, actually, if you approach them about EU funding, depending on their past experience. But sometimes they can be really enthusiastic if they've had a good experience. So I think sometimes we have a responsibility to companies to make sure that the projects are run well. But when I came to local government, what I discovered is that it's very much a juggling act. As I often say, people expect the local council to pick up your bins, to fix your road, fill in the potholes, and then bring in align your development plans to SDGs and bring in money for the European Green Deal. So there's a lot of juggling that happens at local government level, and I think this is what some people find off-putting, and they wonder, okay, I've enough to do, I've all these meetings to go to, I've all these different things to do. Why do we need another European project? What difference is it going to make? And I suppose what I found very interesting was that at local government level, it's not necessarily about the money. The money is nice, and if you're in academia, the money is like 90% of why you're applying. But in local government, really, the reason you're applying for funding is for the focus and for the deadlines. So for the focus in that, a European project, if I take City Exchange, one of our Horizon 2020s as an example, it's something where if you have a goal, particularly to move to a clean energy future, it provides a focus to draw in people from not just across the organization, but from across the city to focus on that goal. And we found it very useful from that perspective. Another utility of European projects is that it gives you a deadline. So you usually have a 4-year project, or in some cases a 5-year project, and it has an end date, and the money is gone after the end date. So it really provides a focus to get that project achieved within that time scale. I think we've seen with many projects in every local authority across the country, kind of plans that sit on tables, and then they move on to somebody else, and then on to somebody else, and on to somebody else. And after 20 years, it's the same plan, but it's been rehashed several times. But a European project, through the nature of its reporting and of its deadlines, can help you move things along, depending on the size of what you want to do. And also, European, particularly the Horizon 2020s, will bring in expertise. So normally, if we want a company to work with us on a goal, if we want the best academic advice, we have to pay for that. But if you're already partnered with them in the European project, then that expertise has to work with you, and it's already paid for by the project. So I think that's one of the huge values of European projects. It's the knowledge that it brings in for free that you wouldn't have had otherwise, and that can really help benefit your citizens. Now in Limerick, we've through our projects, we have connections now with 44 cities in 19 countries, and that's sometimes, particularly when you're on the Atlantic edge, you wonder, how are we performing compared to other cities across Europe? And really, European projects provides you that perspective, in that you make new colleagues and you make new friends in all these locations. Unfortunately, we can't travel to them at the moment, but we're still all in touch over the different meeting platforms, and that's a huge value. Like, to know that your city is on track, that it's not falling behind, or if you are falling behind in an area, that you know who the best people in Europe are to go to get advice, to see what they're doing, to see if you can apply that back home. So really, the knowledge base is a huge value of European projects. I'm going to very quickly go through some of our current portfolio. I'm going to go through 7 of the projects. We've 2 extra in terms of the green leaf, and we have a new one that, like Ronan, doesn't have a logo yet, but it's a very short-term project. It's a Northern Periphery and Arctic kind of 6-month flash COVID project that came from PlaceE, but I'll give that a mention there. But we have 2 Horizon 2020s. They're 100% funded. That's City Exchange and Go Green Routes. With 3 interregs, PlaceE, which is Northern Periphery and Arctic, Capitaine and Mia, which are both Atlantic area interregs. And last but not least, by any measure, are the 2 URBACs that we're running at the moment, Find Your Greatness and Health and Green Space. So to give you a quick flash overview of the main projects. So PlaceE, this aligns with some of our community outreach work. With PlaceE, in summary, what it did was it took a group of young people and a group of older people, put them together, gave them tablets to work with. And so the younger people taught the older people how to use the technology, and the older people taught the younger people about their social history. And really, it was a really successful project, and it led to a lot of offshoots, such as seminars on end-of-life preparedness and kind of planning what happens if your health starts to fail and as you get older. And they were hugely attended and very popular events. So there was great value found in this project, to the point that now that it's coming towards its end, there's only another 3 months left on it. This secondary project, Remind, has kicked off and will run for another few months to basically look at the effects of COVID-19 and isolation on mental health. So we're feeding into that at the moment, and we're looking forward to the findings on that and seeing what recommendations are there. And I think that will turn into a new project going forward. Then the Capitaine project, the problem this project is tackling is currently, if you're on the Shannon, and it attracts a lot of tourists every year cruising up and down, you can get as far as Ardnacrusha, and you can go further, but people don't because they're afraid to. They're afraid of the loch. They're afraid of the river between Ardnacrusha and Limerick City, and they're kind of denying themselves the pleasure of boating along that stretch of the river and coming into the city and spending their lovely money doing activities in Limerick city centre. So part of this project is kind of, looking at tide and flow meters, deciding the best time for people to proceed down the river. And at the moment, we're developing a virtual reality experience. So if people are unsure, they can try it out for themselves online, and they can see exactly how to do it and how to schedule things and what they will see if they come down the river. So it might not solve the problem, but I think it will get us a long way towards solutions. And then we have the MIA project, which looks at military, maritime, and industrial heritage. We're partners with Cork on this project. So we're using it there's a part of the city around Lough Key. It's where the Park Canal met the River Shannon, and it used to be the gateway for goods coming from inland to access the city and then to access the Atlantic Ocean. And it had a wonderfully rich industrial heritage. There were several mills there, one of the biggest breweries in the country at the time, a real rival for Guinness, and all that's gone now. And all that remains are the lockkeepers' houses. And as you can see from the pictures at the bottom, they're really really in need of repair and conservation. So we're using this project to focus on that and to use those as a sort of nice entry into the green routes that are there that will take you from the city out towards UL and out along the river. Then there's City Exchange. This is the project that my bread is buttered with. So this is helping us achieve a few goals. It's helping us achieve some of our CCAP goals. It's helping us to engage citizens on energy usage and energy conservation and behaviour change. It's helping us to measure consumption in the Georgian buildings in the city. And also it's helping us to align our city and county development plan with the sustainable development goals, and that's going very well at the moment. We had one of our European Week of Regions and Cities talks was on that very topic, and it's helping us to develop some e-mobility hubs. So we're now working with GoCar and with the transport providers in the city to try and create hubs where people can choose environmentally friendly options. So City Exchange is really helping us to further a lot of ambitions. It's a very ambitious project, but it's our largest project, worth about 2 million euro to the council and about 6.8 million, I think, to the city, including the university and other partners. But it's for that money, it's aiming to achieve quite a number of goals and making progress on a lot of them at the moment, even despite COVID. Then we have our urbaks. I'm a big fan of urbaks. I didn't think I would be when I first started looking at them. I thought, oh, what are these little projects going to achieve? And actually for local government, they're fantastic, because what they do is they pay for your policy development. And not only do they pay for your policy development, they give you a good excuse and good methodologies to go out and target the experts in your own community and to bring them on board to help co-create your future policies. So Find Your Greatness is looking at taking our current branding and aligning it with smart city branding. So that very early stage, we've done our roadmap, and we hope to have a full plan by the end of the project in 2022.
Terry, I'm just conscious of time. I was just maybe if you give you another few minutes and you could conclude.
Okay, so these next two projects actually are an example of how European projects should work really in practice. So we have the European Green Leaf Award, which helped us, well, it's as a result of work that our excellent environment department have been doing. And that work was taken and formed into a proposal, an URBAC proposal called Health and Green Space, which is to look at health responsive planning. And in parallel to that application, another application was done for Horizon 2020 called Go Green Routes, which was submitted by UL and is run by UL. And we were able to align them so that the output from health and green spaces will help feed into the infrastructural developments in Go Green Routes. So I'm going to come back to this topic of alignment, because it's been mentioned by Teresa and it's been mentioned by Ronan, and it's key to doing EU projects in local government. If they don't align, as Ronan said, from the proposal stage, if you can tell it won't align, you should say no, because EU projects shouldn't make work. They should help you do the work you already plan to do. So our project managers on these projects are already working in the departments, and their projects, in most cases, fulfill part of their day-to-day work. And that's what you want. You don't want a project that's going to create work that you don't want to do, because it will just fail and it'll just be abandoned halfway through and create an awful lot of complications. So the way to avoid that happening is to make sure it aligns with your corporate strategy, as Teresa mentioned, to make sure it aligns with your city and county development plan and with your RESAs. So that way, at least you know the objectives of your project are going to match the objectives of the organization for the next 5 years, which is often the time scale of the project. And on the broader scale, it should look at your climate action plans, your CCAP, your digital strategy, your regeneration plans, things like that. So if you are embedding it in a department, if that department has a plan, then if you align the project, it's just going to help them do their work. That said, it does create its own paperwork. You still have to put in your annual reports, you have to do your claims, you have to do your audits, and for that you need a project management office, as Ronan has said, because you can devalue your projects if you don't put a structure in place that can handle that extra workload, because you want your people implementing the project. You don't want them filling in Excel sheets all day trying to figure out what an accountant has been trained for life. So often, if you're being visited by an audit team, or you've been going to a commission review, that will normally be a pair of people, a project officer and a finance officer. And you want to be able to speak the same language as them. So you want a project officer who can talk to a project officer, and you want a finance officer who can talk to a finance officer. So if you are creating a project office, that the minimum you need is your project officer and your finance officer. And as your projects come online, then the volume of work will increase around outreach and communications and dissemination, and your admin is going to start to increase, particularly around HR issues. So the ideal PMO team, I think, would consist of about 4 people. In Limerick, we're nearly there. We've 3 people at the moment, and I think with a bit more effort, we'll get that extra one if a few more of our projects come online. And this is how they'll be paid for. So this pipeline is a bit pessimistic, but often for the number of applications, so let's say you do 7 applications in a year, if it's Horizon 2020, you might get 1 of those. The URBAC success rate is much higher, but it doesn't really give you the staff costs that you need. It's the big ones, it's the 6-figure sums that you need to start paying for people. And what we do is, while the project has been run in a certain department, we aim for 25% of the staff costs in that project to go towards the PMO team. Now that varies depending on how big the project is and what the needs of the project are, but you have to plan the funding of your project management office so that it can adapt and it can function through the duration of the project, because you don't want a situation where all your projects are coming to an end and you've no one to help with the claims. So it's the pipeline is key to that, and it's quite a lot of work. It's like we submitted 3H 2020s a few months ago. We have another 4 now in the pipeline for January, and they take a lot of work on top of everything else you're doing. But you know, you have to do it, and just to give Ronan some credit there on the work he's doing in Cork. If a proposal comes in, if an institution approaches you with a project opportunity, and if it's a good one, if you've nobody there to work on the proposal, you're just going to drop the ball, and that project will never happen. So I think that's one of the real values of people like Ronan and myself, that if an opportunity comes in, there's the capacity there to coordinate that proposal.
And Terry, I
So,
think I got
that's me
you
done. So,
thank you.
thanks, Teresa.
No, thank you very much, and apologies for interrupting. But I know I'm very conscious people have been sitting now for 2 hours waiting, listening to us all. And I want to give, before we just have the last presentation, I want to give everybody the opportunity, if there are any questions at this point about any of the speakers to date, you have the opportunity to ask them now. So I don't know, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for Terry and Ronan particularly. But also I'm obviously here to take questions too. So anyone want to switch on their camera and ask a question? No, everybody okay? Well, with that, then we'll just quickly move on then to Rose and Karen. They're going to tell us about the ETC network, and then maybe there'll be some questions after that. But thank you for staying with us. We'll probably run a few minutes over time, but hopefully you're able to continue with us. So over to you, Karen and Rose.
Hi, thanks, Teresa. I think Rose is just getting our presentation up there. And again, we are very conscious that we're running into the end of the seminar, so we won't take up much of your time.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rose Power. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an EU projects officer in the Southern Regional Assembly, and myself and my colleague Karen Coughlin are going to give you the briefest of presentations in relation to the European Territorial Cooperation Network.
That's great. Thanks, Rose. As Rose said, we both work as EU project officers with the Southern Regional Assembly, and we've established what's called an ETC network, or European Territorial Cooperation Network. So just a very quick run through, I suppose, of the programmes that it, I suppose, centres around. And I suppose just to point out that ETC is a goal of EU cohesion policy, and it facilitates exchange between national, regional and local actors. And I suppose in keeping with that theme, then the ETC network is all about exchange. So under the ETC programme, you'll hear 3 strands being referred to, and these are Interreg A, B and C. And you can see, I think we've kind of covered most of these today already. So I suppose just to point out that Interreg A covers the Ireland Wales programme, and it's across border. When you hear Interreg B being referred to, it refers to the transnational programmes, and they're covered by the Northwest Europe, the Atlantic area and the Northern Periphery and Arctic programmes. And then you've got the Interreg C programmes, which covers Interreg Europe, Interact, ESPON and URBACT. And again, if you want any more information on these, obviously we're here to, at any point after this, to answer questions on those.
Okay, so what is the ETC network all about? Well, basically it's a network that the Southern Regional Assembly facilitates, but it's actually owned by the members. So any EU project officer operating on any of those types of projects are welcome to join the ETC network. And while we facilitate it, it's driven by the members in relation to what we present, expert speakers and anything else that the ETC network gets involved in. Members include local authorities, higher education institutions, non-governmental agencies and SRA. And what does the network provide? Well, it provides opportunities for you to learn about European project funding, to look at and have access to the experts who are the national contact points for the ETC programs. And it gives you an opportunity to network and link with partners, experts, stakeholders,
owners of good practices, and helps you to build relationships which will support you for your applications for European fundings in relation to getting the right people together in order for you to create an impressive application. In addition to that, what we do is after each event, we do run polls, we run surveys, and we request the members to tell us what they need from us in relation to training. We can provide peer-to-peer training, we can get specialists on board to talk about specific thematic areas. And we'd also provide you with programme updates in relation to calls, in relation to programmes, and in relation to any aspects that you believe would be beneficial to you as an EU project officer. Up to now, we've provided in-depth training from the Southern Assembly in relation to project claims, in relation to regional action plans, but we are driven by what you as members wish to avail of in relation to services, in relation to linkages, and in relation to any learning or support that you need.
Thanks, Rose. I suppose then, as local authorities, why would you get involved with the ETC network? What are the benefits to you? I suppose as we've seen today, navigating European projects can be challenging and complex, but very worthwhile, I think, as we've seen from the outputs that Ronan and Terry were able to demonstrate today. And I think being a part of that ETC network will help you kind of navigate those. It'll give you, more knowledge of the ETC programs. You could see there where Terry was kind of able to isolate the differences between your Horizon 2020 and your URBACT. It'll give you updates of the funding opportunities that are available and maybe what's applicable to yourselves and aligning them to your strategic objectives. I think Teresa had said a number of times, and it's been kind of iterated throughout the day, it's all about kind of linking in with others. And I think the ETC network gives us that invaluable opportunity to do that. It's a free service. I know some of the networks that were highlighted today are paid services, so this is a free service. And I suppose coming out of that, then it links you in with the other EU project officers or partners that have been through these projects or programs before, gives you access to stakeholders. It might give you opportunities to speak to potential project partners, and you've heard reference to what are called good practices. They would be good working examples that we have here in the country, and again give you access to good solid examples of those and where they're happening and the owners of those particular good practices. As Rose had alluded to, we've held training events, so we get support from experts in the area. We would have updates from experienced project partners. And then the EU programme national contact points there are available to talk as well. Just for example, we were speaking about the Committee of the Regions member today, and we have at our next event, and I'll speak to that in a few minutes, but we have somebody from the Committee of the Regions speaking at the event. So you can see how it all kind of ties together.
Okay, so where can you find out a little bit more information on the ETC network? Well, you can go to the Southern Assembly's website, and I've given you the link there as to the ETC network, and within that you'll find details of past events where you'll see the presentations of all the past events and also recordings of them, and they're available there, and after every event we'll put that information up. In addition to that, if you have any specific requests for more information, you can email me at rosepower@southernassembly.ie or my colleague Karen, and we're available to assist you or provide you with additional information. In addition to that, if you want or are interested in attending future ETC network events, then we're very happy for you to email us and we'll add you to our mailing list. And that will keep you abreast of the different events that are coming on stream and different events that are coming on stream and different workshops that we'll be hoping to hold in the new year.
So then I suppose that's a very quick overview of what the ETC network is. Our next event just happens to be taking place tomorrow. If anybody does want to attend that hasn't registered for it already, please feel free to email us. And as I said, there's a lot of talk about the Committee of the Regions today. We have one of those members coming from Cork City Council themselves. Will be speaking to the Committee of the Regions. But again, if anyone wants to find out more details about about the full agenda, just please feel free to email us. We hope to have the next workshop taking place sometime in March, and again, that will be driven by by yourselves as to what you want to see happening at that workshop, and then we would hope to hold either the next webinar, meeting or workshop, depending again on your needs as they arise, in June 2021. And I suppose again, just to drive that key message home, that it's a members-led network, and we will, where possible, facilitate your requirements and needs. What would you like to get out of this? So that's a very, very quick overview, and I see Teresa there, so we'll say thank you very much.
We're very sorry about the speed that we've gone through that, but we're just conscious that we're gone over time. But myself and Karen are both available for any questions you might have, any interest you might have, and if you wish to attend the event tomorrow, by all means, drop us a quick email. Our email address is there, and we'll be very happy to add you to the invite list. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose and Karen. And that concludes our presentations, and I'm very, very conscious, as I said, that everyone's been very quietly listening away. So again, if there are any questions, does anyone want to ask anything? If you have any questions, just unmute yourself. Otherwise, as Karen and Rose have said, the ETC network is there for you or your colleagues to join. And also then just to say that I will be in contact with you to send out the survey together with the Southern Regional Assembly to find out what it is you're interested in and what it is you're thinking about. And hopefully this begins the start of a productive and excellent working relationship with all of you as local authorities. So the presentations will be shared with you after this, and we look forward to continued engagement. So thank you very much.